If you have been around cameras long enough, you know some lenses are more than tools. You remember the names people whispered about, the glass they saved for, the lenses they adapted, collected, rented, or dreamed of owning. Some made portraits feel impossible. Some changed cinema. Some were imperfect, rare, heavy, or strange, but they all earned something modern specs cannot buy: legend. You are watching Alt Buzz Lenses, where glass becomes history and stories outlive the gear. If that is the kind of content you live for, subscribe now, because this countdown is one you will want to watch to the end. At number 10, we have the Vivitar Series 170 to 210mm f3.5. And if that name surprises you on a legendary lens list, that reaction is precisely the point. In the 1970s and early 80s, zoom lenses had a reputation problem. Most photographers trusted primes. Zooms were seen as compromises, slower, softer, less serious. And third-party brands existed mostly at the budget end, where expectations were low and results often matched them. Vivitar was not supposed to change that conversation. But the Series 1 line did something unexpected. It hired serious optical designers, used quality glass, and built lenses that could stand beside the big names without embarrassment. The 70 to 210mm f3.5 was one of the clearest expressions of that ambition. A constant f3.5 aperture across the entire zoom range was not something you took for granted back then. Add strong close focus ability, solid construction, and a telephoto reach that was genuinely useful for portrait work and events. And suddenly, this was not a compromised lens. It was a serious piece of glass, wearing a brand name the industry had not yet learned to respect. Its legend was never about optical perfection. It was about what it represented. This lens helped rewrite the story of what third-party glass could be. It told photographers that the name on the barrel was not the only thing that mattered. What mattered was the image at the end of it. But if one lens changed how photographers saw third-party zooms, the next helped create a look that vintage shooters are still chasing today. At number 9, we have the Zeiss Jena Biotar 58mm f2. And before you say Helios, this lens came first. The swirly bokeh look that exploded across social media and vintage lens forums did not begin with the Helios 44. The Helios was built on the Biotar design, the visual language that made those lenses famous, the soft spinning backgrounds, the way foreground subjects seemed to float. That language was written in Jena, Germany, long before it had a name on the internet. The Biotar 58mm f2 was a double Gauss design that Zeiss developed in the 1930s and refined across several decades. At its center, it was sharp in a way that felt almost contradictory to its wide-open character. Stop it down slightly, and it cleaned up beautifully. But wide open, it did something that no modern computational correction was ever designed to replicate. It rendered the world with a warmth, a spin, and an imperfection that felt alive. Portrait photographers who used this lens did not always choose it because it was technically flawless. They chose it because it made their subjects feel present in a way that clinical modern glass sometimes struggles to achieve. The separation was organic. The out-of-focus areas had texture. The swirl gave depth a personality that photographers kept coming back for, year after year, decade after decade. Before the Helios became the internet's swirly bokeh lens, the Biotar helped create the look people are still chasing. That is the quiet legend of a lens that never needed viral moment to earn its place in history. And while some legends are known for strange rendering, the next one became respected because it was small, precise, and almost too capable for its size. At number 8, we have the Olympus OM Zuiko 90mm f2 macro. A lens that made every photographer who held it ask the same quiet question: how did Olympus fit this much into something so small? Olympus built the OM system around a philosophy of compact precision. While other manufacturers were racing toward bigger bodies and heavier glass, Olympus went the other direction. Smaller, lighter, but never lesser. And the Zuiko 90mm f2 macro was one of the purest expressions of that belief. This was a lens with genuine macro capability, true 1:2 magnification without additional attachments, combined with an f2 maximum aperture that made it equally at home for portraits. At close focus, it rendered fine detail with a clarity that serious macro photographers demanded. Pulled back for portrait distances, it produced a rendering that was smooth, controlled, and flattering in a way that felt almost effortless. What made it legendary was not one single thing. It was everything together. The compact size that defied what the optics suggested was possible. The dual personality, macro precision in the morning, portrait glass in the afternoon, the build quality that still holds up decades later. And the rarity that means finding a clean copy today requires patience and a budget that reflects how well collectors understand what this lens actually was. This is the lens that proves small Olympus glass could still feel elite. And it sits on this list not because it was the most famous lens Olympus ever made, but because the photographers who used it never stopped talking about it. But now we move into medium format, where one fast lens made portraits feel bigger, softer, and more intimate than ordinary glass could manage. At number 7, we have the Mamiya Sekor C 80mm f1.9. And if you have ever wondered what it feels like when a fast aperture and medium format meet in the same lens, this is the answer. Medium format has always carried a different emotional weight than 35mm photography. The larger negative, the tonal depth, the way light seems to sit differently in a medium format frame. These qualities attract photographers who want their images to breathe. But medium format has historically meant slower glass. You accepted that trade. You used a tripod. You worked carefully. Mamiya changed that equation with the Sekor C 80mm f1.9. A fast lens on a medium format system meant something entirely different than a fast lens on a 35mm camera. The depth of field implications were different. The subject separation was more pronounced. The way backgrounds dissolved wide open felt like something between photography and painting. Portrait photographers who worked with this lens described it in terms that sounded more emotional than technical. There was a softness wide open that was not a flaw, it was a quality. A quality that made skin tones feel warm, that gave eyes a depth, that separated subjects from their environment in a way that felt considered rather than mechanical. Stop it down and the sharpness arrived with full medium format authority. Stay wide open and the lens became something far more personal. This lens made medium format feel fast, intimate, and almost cinematic. It brought the expressiveness of wide aperture photography into a world that had largely asked photographers to be patient. And for portrait shooters who found it, it felt like a door quietly opening. And if Mamiya made medium format feel dreamy, Canon's next lens brought that same obsession with separation into the manual folks portrait world. At number 6, we have the Canon New FD 85mm f1.2 L. A lens that arrived before most photographers were ready for what it was offering. Canon's obsession with fast portrait glass did not begin with the EF mount. It did not begin with autofocus. It began here, in the manual focus era, with a lens that pushed aperture to a point where the engineering challenges were significant and the creative possibilities were extraordinary. The New FD 85mm f1.2 L was Canon making a statement before statements were a marketing strategy. At f1.2, this lens operated in its own atmosphere. The depth of field was razor thin in a way that demanded focus discipline from the photographer. Every small error was visible. Focus on the tip of a nose and an eye could fall soft. But when the focus landed correctly, when the light was right and the subject was still, the results were the kind of portraits that photographers kept returning to years later, not because they were technically perfect, but because they felt alive in a specific and irreplaceable way. The rendering at f1.2 had a creaminess that modern clinical sharpness does not automatically replicate. Backgrounds did not just blur, they dissolved. The subject did not just appear sharp, they appeared present, separated from their world in a way that gave portraits a quality that photographers in the 1980s were still figuring out how to describe. Before Canon became known for modern RF portrait glass, this FD lens already gave photographers that fast glass obsession. It showed that Canon understood something important long before the autofocus era arrived. That the most memorable portraits were not always the most technically precise ones. If you enjoy lens stories that go deeper than sharpness charts into history, character, and the mythology of glass, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses right now. Hit the like button if this countdown is already doing damage to your wish list. At number 5, we have the Leica Summilux-M 35mm f1.4. And this lens earned its place on this list not through spectacle, but through decades of quiet, undeniable relevance. Leica has always attracted a certain kind of photographer. Not the one sent chasing the longest telephoto or the heaviest body. The one who wants to disappear into a moment. The one who works in available light, in real spaces, among real people. With a camera small enough to go unnoticed, and a lens fast enough to work when the light refuses to cooperate. The Summilux 35mm f1.4 was built for exactly that photographer. 35mm on a rangefinder has a particular quality of seeing. Wide enough to place a subject in their environment, close enough to feel intimate, natural enough that the frame rarely feels forced. When you pair that focal length with an f1.4 aperture, on a lens compact enough to fit in a coat pocket, you get something that changes how a photographer moves through the world. The Summilux 35 did not make every photograph look like a studio portrait. It made available light photography feel intentional. Dimly lit streets, cafes. Documentary work where flash would destroy the moment and a slower lens would miss it entirely. This was the lens that gave photographers permission to work in the dark and come back with something real. Its legend is not separate from Leica culture. It is embedded in it. Generations of photographers have saved for it, adapted versions of it, argued about which generation was the true classic, and carried it on assignments where only one lens was allowed. That kind of loyalty is not bought by specifications alone. This lens became legendary, not because it was the biggest Leica lens, but because it made small rangefinder photography feel expressive in the most honest sense of that word. And then there are lenses that feel excessive by design, heavy, rare, expensive, and almost impossible to ignore. At number 4, we have the Canon EF 200mm f1.8 L USM, a lens that Canon built not because most photographers needed it, but because it proved what was possible when compromise was simply refused. There is a category of photographic equipment that exists beyond practicality. Equipment that carries its own mythology because of what it represents physically. The Canon EF 200mm f1.8 L USM belongs in that category. It is large, it is heavy. It is rare in the way that things become rare when they are expensive to manufacture and expensive to own. And the results it produces remind you exactly why those costs sometimes exist. An f1.8 aperture at 200mm means something very specific in optical terms. It means a front element large enough to gather extraordinary amounts of light at a distance that most lenses force you to stop down to use responsibly. It means subject separation so complete that backgrounds at telephoto distances do not simply blur, they become pure smooth tonal fields with no distracting structure. It means indoor arenas, theater stages, and performance spaces where light is scarce and distance is mandatory become workable with a single lens. Portrait photographers who use this lens at distance describe the compression as almost surreal. Faces rendered against dissolved backgrounds with a tonal quality that shorter, fast lenses could not fully replicate. Sports photographers used it to isolate athletes in arenas lit poorly enough to defeat most telephoto glass. It was not a lens for every day. It was a lens for the specific moment when every other option felt insufficient. This lens did not just blur backgrounds, it made distance feel expensive. And that reputation has survived long past the era of its production. Carried forward by photographers who used it once and never forgot what it showed them. But one of the most beautiful portrait legends did not come from a 35mm camera at all. It came from Hasselblad Zeiss in medium format. At number 3, we have the Zeiss Planar 110mm f2 for Hasselblad. And if there is one section of this list where the word legendary feels completely earned without qualification, it is here. To understand why this lens became what it became, you need to understand what it means to combine three names that each carry weight on their own: Zeiss, Hasselblad, medium format. Separately, each of those words carries gravity in photographic history. Together, built into a single portrait lens with an f2 maximum aperture, they create something that transcends the sum of its parts entirely. The planar optical design is one of the most respected in photographic history, a double Gauss configuration refined over generations to produce central sharpness, controlled rendering, and a quality of out-of-focus transition that the finest portrait photographers in the world made a specific point of seeking out. On a medium format Hasselblad body, that design operated on a larger image circle than 35mm glass, which meant the depth of field characteristics were different in a fundamental way. Wide open at f2 on medium format, the shallow plane of focus carries the full tonal depth of the larger negative behind it. And that combination produces a three-dimensionality that photographers describe more often in emotional terms than technical ones. Studio portraits made with this lens have a quality that clients and art directors recognized even without knowing the source. A sense of depth and presence, a sculptural quality to faces, a gradual, organic transition between sharp and soft that felt expensive in a way that was immediately visible but difficult to fully articulate. The lens did not just render a subject, it gave them weight in the frame. This is the lens that made Hasselblad portraits feel impossibly deep, soft, and expensive. It sits at number 3 not because it is the most historically significant lens on this list, but because it represents the emotional peak of what portrait photography can feel like when the glass is truly extraordinary. Now we leave still photography for a moment because some legendary lenses shaped not just photographs, but the emotional language of cinema itself. At number 2, we have the Cooke Speed Panchro. And this is where the list moves beyond photography into something genuinely larger. The Cooke Speed Panchro is not a single lens. It is a family, a lineage. A set of cinema primes developed in Britain across several decades that collectively became responsible for some of the most recognized images in the history of moving pictures. To talk about the Speed Panchro as a product is to miss the point entirely. The correct way to talk about it is as a contribution to visual culture, one that cinematographers measured in terms of feeling rather than resolution charts. Cooke Optics developed the Speed Panchro series beginning in the 1920s and continued refining the design into the 1950s and beyond. What those lenses shared across generations was something some cinematographers described with a word that became shorthand for a specific quality: the Cooke look. Warmth, a softness in the highlights that felt organic rather than processed. Skin tones rendered with a subtlety that made actors look human in the specific way that cinema required. Contrast that served the story rather than demanding attention for itself. The Speed Panchro was used on films that defined what cinema looked like in its most formative decades. Cinematographers chose these lenses not because they were the technically superior option on every measured chart, but because the images they produced felt right in a way that was difficult to articulate and impossible to ignore once you knew what to look for. That was the Cooke look, and it outlived the original production era by decades. Today, cinematographers still rehouse vintage Speed Panchros. They adapt them onto modern cinema cameras. They pay significant prices to access a rendering that newer, technically superior glass does not automatically replicate. That is not nostalgia. That is a professional judgment that some qualities of old glass serve certain stories in a way that nothing more modern has fully replaced. Some lenses become legendary because photographers use them. Cooke Speed Panchro speak legendary because cinema itself used them to create emotion. And that is a different kind of legend entirely. And at number 1 is a lens that did not just become legendary because of its look. It became legendary because it changed what filmmakers could do with a zoom. At number 1, we have the Angénieux 25 to 250mm zoom. A lens that did not just become famous, it helped change the grammar of moving images permanently. Pierre Angénieux was France's optical designer who spent his career solving problems that other manufacturers considered unsolvable. The 25 to 250 millimeter zoom lens was the clearest expression of that ambition. A zoom range of 10 to 1, covering wide angle through long telephoto in a single lens, was not a common reality in professional cinema when Angénieux introduced this capability. Filmmakers worked with primes. They changed lenses between setups. They planned entire shooting days around what fixed focal lengths made logistically possible. The idea that a single lens could move through that entire range without unacceptable optical compromise was the kind of claim that required proof before it received belief. The Angénieux 25 to 250 millimeter provided that proof in a way that the industry could not dismiss. Documentary filmmakers could follow action without stopping to change glass. Television journalists could frame wide and push in without losing a moment to a lens change. Feature cinematographers discovered that a zoom lens in skilled hands was not a compromise. It was a new kind of creative instrument with its own expressive logic. The zoom as a narrative device, the slow push into a face that shifts the emotional register of a scene, the rapid pullback that reveals context in a single motion. These techniques existed before the Angénieux, but the quality and range of this lens helped make the zoom respectable in a cinema culture that had treated it with genuine suspicion. It demonstrated that zoom lenses could live in the same conversation as the finest cinema primes, not as some substitutes, but as instruments with their own distinct possibilities. Pierre Angénieux received a Technical Academy Award, the Oscar reserved for those who changed the tools of cinema itself, in recognition of contributions that this lens represented. That is not a product achievement. That is a place in film history. And that is exactly why nothing else on this list belongs at number 1. This was the lens that helped make the zoom itself feel cinematic. A legendary lens is not always the one that wins every chart. It is the one people still remember when the chart is forgotten. These 10 lenses gave photographers and filmmakers something that specifications alone cannot manufacture: a look, a feeling, a story worth repeating. Subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses for more. We will see you in the next one.